Welcome, everyone. We are here with our Structured Literacy Session 4, Supporting Comprehension with Sentence Level Writing. My name is Jennifer Ferlito-Craig, and I will work with you through this information. I want to acknowledge all the organization and professionals who contributed to the information and research prepared in this presentation. Jane Fell-Green wrote the Language Comprehensive Literacy Curriculum, 4th edition. We use a bit of that information today. Lexia Letters by Dr. Mose and Dr. Tolman, Literacy How by Margie Gillis and Nancy Chappell Eberhardt, and then Reading Universe, all about teaching reading and writing. Thank you to those who've contributed to this information. Here is a notice about using material in the TA Center presentations. Participants are free to share and adapt the resources, but they have to give the TA Center credit, and then please indicate where any adaptations have been made. Today, we are in session 4 of our Structured Literacy series. We will be working through supporting comprehension with sentence level writing. Our 5th and final session will be on vocabulary and morphology. Today, our purpose is to learn about syntax as it relates to reading and writing. When children write, the goal is to have them produce sentences that are syntactically correct. So we want them to be structurally correct. When children read, the goal is for them to utilize their understanding of the function of words to facilitate comprehension. So we want them to know who did it and what did it do. Today, our outcomes are here. Participants will summarize syntax and how it relates to comprehension. Participants will use function-based questions to expand sentences. We will work through syntax, comprehension, and function-based questions. We always start our sessions in this series with our topic of the science of reading, which is a vast body of research that has determined that teaching students to read using structured literacy is the most powerful way to prevent reading failure. That would be reading instruction focused on the structure of our language system. You have seen these slides before, but it's important that I reference why we are having this professional learning series. Our state of Michigan has recently passed Public Act 146, which outlines details for the K-12 literacy instruction. In PA 146, it outlines that districts should have professional learning grounded in the science of reading and the principles of structured literacy. So this series aligns to our new legislation. Here on this slide is the definition of structured literacy. I have not included this in our previous sessions, and I absolutely should have, so I am including it here. This is the definition of structured literacy as defined in PA 146. I encourage you to take a moment and pause the recording to review the definition. You'll notice much overlap about the points that we've been discussing, all relating to systematic explicit instruction around the structure of language. Each session of this series will cover instructional areas of our language system indicated on this IDA Structured Literacy Info Map. Today's topic is on the comprehension side of our equation, and we will discuss sentence structure. Here we have the simple view of reading. The simple view of reading is a framework for educators to understand what's going on in the brain when their students are reading and apply that understanding to the instructional decisions that we as teachers are making. The simple view of reading informs what we teach, what we assess, and how we determine where a student is struggling if they are not comprehending. Today's topic fits within the language comprehension bucket, which we will unpack on the next slide. Here you see the cognitive capacities underlying language comprehension. When we are trying to make sense of spoken language, our brains are combining the literal meaning of what is being said with our inferential understanding of what is being said. These two sets of cognitive capacities lead to language comprehension. Our literal understanding of what is being said, which we derive from our linguistic knowledge, is based on three knowledge domains: phonological knowledge, which starts with the acoustic signal being recognized as speech sounds for language; syntactic knowledge, which we're parsing out the true meaning of phrases, clauses, and sentences; and then semantic knowledge, which includes the meaning of words, word parts, and even phrases that take on their own meaning. So here I have highlighted syntactic knowledge, and this is where we are going to focus today. In our last session, we reviewed the writing rope. You'll see that this model identifies many strands that contribute to fluent and skilled writing. We have critical thinking, syntax, text structure, writing craft, and transcription. In our last session, we discussed handwriting and spelling. Today, we will cover syntax, which includes grammar and syntactic awareness, sentence elaboration, and punctuation. Syntax is the study of sentence structure, basically how we arrange and combine words to make meaning. We are going to explore syntax and its relationship to meaning. So how can we connect sentence structure and comprehension? To comprehend text, a reader must decode and identify the meanings of individual words. The reader must also decipher the meanings of words in the context of sentences. Readers must be able to understand sentences in order to comprehend the whole text. When we think about syntax, we are thinking about the rules that dictate the word order of sentences. It is the system in a language that specifies how words, phrases, and clauses can be sequenced. The syntax framework determines who is doing what, to whom, and in what way. Syntax is positioned at the crossroads between word level and text level literacy development. Children first start out listening and then talking and develop oral language syntactic ability. Kids come to school with a lot of this in place. So syntax does start before reading, right? With their oral language. Then they need to transition and learn how to understand syntax when they're reading and creating, which is writing. We are teaching something that they already know, right? They already know it through their oral language syntactic ability. We need to teach syntax explicitly by putting in the context of reading and writing. The oral piece has come naturally. The written piece for reading and writing needs explicit instruction. Words on their own convey meaning, but when we put them together in sentences and text, context is present, and we then know which meaning is intended. Relationships between words don't become apparent until we are working at the text level. Context also helps understanding. Learning words like in and on in the context of other words, likely at the phrase level, is preferred rather than learning them in isolation. Because context is present, it helps us understand which meaning is intended. Syntactic awareness means having the ability to monitor the relationships among the words in a sentence in order to understand while reading or composing orally or in writing. Students build syntactic awareness through exposure to oral language when they are young, and particularly through exposure to written language that they hear through read-alouds or independent reading. Let's take a moment and talk about word order. We need to understand individual words, but their order within a sentence is what creates the meaning, and more importantly, can actually change meaning. We need to be able to read the words and we need to know how to make sense of the words. So it isn't just enough to be able to decode. We need to be able to make sense of the words and create meaning of connected words. So here on the slide, we have two sentences. Zach painted the blue door. Zach painted the door blue. So in both sentences, who painted the door? Zach. In both sentences, what did he do? In both sentences, he painted. In both sentences, what did Zach paint? The door. But now let's look at that second sentence. In the second sentence, he painted the door the color blue. In the first sentence, we are not sure what color the door was painted. These subtle word order differences can make a significant shift in meaning. Okay, now we are going to touch on grammar a tiny bit. Grammar is a tool, and teachers of reading need to be knowledgeable about grammar so that we can use it as a tool. In our instruction, we should focus on the function of words first, and we will get into a lot more of this throughout this session. When I'm talking about function, we want to know how do the who and the do in a sentence work together before labeling them as a subject in a verb or a noun in a verb. I really want to know how the who and the do in a sentence work together. Understanding the difference between a complete sentence and an incomplete phrase will allow students to practice composing and deconstructing sentences, and it will help them identify the who and the do. We need our students to have knowledge of sentence parts. For example, if we think about nouns, when we're writing or when we're speaking, we don't say the girl, the girl, the girl over and over throughout our writing, right? We use variation in our language with the use of pronouns. It's when students can track and connect these across text is when it strengthens comprehension. So I want the student to be able to connect that she is connected to the girl. I want kids to know the function first because labels, such as pronouns, are often abstract for many students. Once we understand the function of sentences, we can then later label things as nouns and subjects or verbs and predicates. A lot of times teachers say, well, when is later? When can I start giving that grammar label? We can start labeling with grammar terms once your students understand the function. When they understand the who and the do, then we can label the subject and the predicate. But always focus on function first. We want to know how does that naming part and that action part, the who and the do, how do they work together in a sentence? We can then later label it as a subject and a predicate, but focus on function first. Here is an example. The girl swims. She jumps in the water. I mentioned that when students can track and connect words across text, it strengthens comprehension. So this is an example of that. The word she is a pronoun, but the importance for comprehension is understanding that she means the same as the girl. We want our students to be able to make this connection. This is called a pronoun referent. I mentioned we can introduce grammar once students have a grasp on the who and the do. Take a moment and identify the who and the do in these two sentences. Feel free to pause the recording. Here is another example. Today, I walked the dog. Today is telling me when. After lunch, I walked the dog. After lunch is telling me when. The difference between these two whens is that one is a word and one is a phrase. Today is a word, after lunch is a phrase, both telling me when. So here we have an adverb and an adverbial phrase. I really want students to be able to tell me what part of the sentence is telling us when. I want students to be able to tell me what is the part of a sentence telling us. I would much rather that than saying to my students, let's find the adverb. I really want to focus on function first. I want my students to be able to tell me what this part of the sentence is sharing. What's it telling us? What's it explaining? Also, just to think about this, after lunch, that phrase is a bit more specific than today. So they do have different meanings. So now this is syntax instruction, basically how we arrange and combine words to make meaning. Our next section is comprehension. Reading comprehension and writing should be taught in tandem. We are writing about our reading and we are reading about our writing. Why teach reading and writing together? Research shows that reading and writing are closely aligned. Reading and writing depend upon many of the same skills, strategies, and knowledge. They are developed and deployed in different ways in reading and writing. There was a meta-analysis of more than 100 studies by Steve Graham and Michael Aber in 2010, in which students wrote about text, and they found that writing in various ways about what one had read improved comprehension and learning. And it did so better than reading alone, reading and rereading, or reading and discussing. Syntax instruction based on text students are reading gives students a source of information to draw upon rather than giving isolated assignments when we have kids writing. So we really want to connect all of our instruction to the text that students are actively reading and working with. Interpretation of sentences is required if we are going to comprehend whole texts. This is an important quote. Too often, we are not spending enough time working on comprehension at the phrase and sentence level. If we do not understand text at the simple level, like a sentence or a phrase, comprehending an entire whole text is likely going to be very difficult. So again, syntax instruction is very important. That sentence level work will go a long way. Here on this slide is an example of a student who read some decodable text. The excerpt from the passage said, "You have to zip up the tent," said Jazz. "If you zip it, the bugs do not get in." And this student said, after she read that sentence, she decoded it perfectly, but then said, "Why do they add words that don't make sense?" And so this student really needed help to connect the pronoun it to the referent tent. So when our kids can make connections, it strengthens their comprehension. So this student had a difficult time understanding that if you zip it, they're referring to the tent. If you zip the tent, the bugs don't get in. This student required explicit instruction to understand the structure. So this is a really nice example of how comprehension is impacted if we're not explicitly teaching things like cohesive ties. We're going to shift a bit and talk about how we teach syntax. We can genuinely teach syntax to pre-readers, early readers, and readers. We start teaching syntax right away when children enter school, even before they are able to decode. For a pre-reader, we can classify pictures or words according to function. So we can be sorting the naming part or the action part, right? We can be sorting, is this picture or word, if they're able to decode the word, is this a person, a place, or a thing? And then we can combine those nouns and verbs to create a complete thought. You could combine two pictures to create a complete thought, which is a sentence. And this will lead to the topic of understanding basic sentence structure. You can start this very, very early, even with pictures. Our early readers can sort words according to function. And this can be done and really should be done with decodable words because then we're connecting our decoding instruction and our syntax instruction. So you have a list of decodable words and you are sorting these words according to function. The who or the what pictures and the verb pictures, the action pictures. And then, of course, for our readers, we can do some sentence building. We're going to combine the naming part and the action part to create a complete sentence. That leads us to basic sentence structure. Sentences are the building blocks for writing. One by one, sentences communicate ideas that add up to make meaning. So we need to teach students about sentences to support their reading and their ability to write quality, complete sentences. We really should be in providing explicit instruction about the basic sentence structures. So every simple, complete sentence has two parts: a naming part, which is our subject, and an action part, which is the predicate. Sometimes I call this the who and the do. So when we are beginning to teach students how to write connected text, we start with these two basic parts of a sentence. Every sentence has a naming part and an action part, a who and a do. So that's our subject and our predicate. Sentence combining and sentence expansion work, they does become useful once students have understanding of this basic sentence structure. There are three basic sentence structures. We have simple, compound, and complex. The next three slides will go through each sentence structure. A simple sentence expresses one complete thought. It has one subject and one predicate. We have a naming part and an action part. So an example would be, the children jumped. A compound sentence structure expresses two complete thoughts. So we have two subjects and two predicates. And that is going to be joined by a conjunction. And the acronym FANBOYS is often used to describe these conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So we have two complete thoughts. So we have two naming parts and two action parts. Here is an example. The dog shook his toy, but the cat walked by without stopping. You'll notice that the two independent parts, the dog shook his toy, the cat walked by without stopping. Both of those two parts can both stand alone. Lastly, we have a complex sentence structure. This expresses two thoughts, one complete thought and one incomplete thought. It cannot stand alone, so that means it doesn't make sense by itself. And these are going to be joined by a subordinating conjunction. Because, before, when, while, after, as. Take a look at our example. The children talked loudly after he left the room. Our complete thought is the children talked loudly. Our incomplete thought, after he left the room. The last section that we will review today is function-based questions. We are going to gather 2 colors of sticky notes, and we are going to go through a sentence expansion activity. Here you'll see a masterpiece sentences chart. Before we dive into our activity, you will go through this chart, the masterpiece sentence chart. This is adapted from the Masterpiece Sentences by Jane Green, and it is from the Language Comprehensive Literacy Curriculum, 4th edition. Masterpiece Sentences is an activity from the language curriculum. It basically is a vehicle to develop the understanding of grammatic and syntactic structures and apply them to writing. The goal is to help students grasp aspects of that syntactic structure and grammatic function. So on the left side, we have the naming part, and that's going to be the subject. Everything under the subject describes the subject. So the who, how many, what kind, and which one, these are all details that are going to describe the subject. On the right side of the chart, we have the action part, and this is the predicate. The boxes below all describe the predicate. So what did they do? Who or what, when, where, how? All of these details describe the predicate. Here is a completed chart that coincides with the grammatical terminology. And this is really just for the teacher's knowledge. Here is a picture prompt that we will use today. We're going to look at this picture prompt, and we are going to grab sticky notes, and we are going to use the Masterpiece Sentences chart to build a sentence. Here we have our Masterpiece Sentence chart. We have 2 different color sticky notes prepared, 1 color for the subject, 1 color for the predicate. And then you'll see the picture prompt of the 2 children walking the dogs, and that is the picture we are going to use to build our sentence. We're going to start building our sentence. So we're going to take a look at our picture prompt with our students. At the beginning, it is helpful to use the past tense for sentence building. When teaching with your students, you could use word cards, strips of paper that go on a pocket chart. You could use a smartboard and manipulate the words, whatever is appropriate for your teaching presentation situation. The first step is building a base subject and a base predicate. So the first thing I'm going to ask my students is take a look at this picture and who did it. So together with my students, we are going to determine that the who is the children. So we have our base subject. So now we need to make a complete sentence. And in order to make a complete sentence, we also need the predicate. So what did they do? And then I would come up with my students that they walked. So we have a complete sentence. Children walked. So now I'm going to start by expanding the subject. I'm going to ask my students, how many children are there? We have 2 children. And what kind of children are there? We have young children. You could have a variety of answers that are correct that you can build with your students. I'm actually going to leave this one blank because it is okay to leave a box or 2 on each side of the chart blank. We don't want our students creating these giant run-on sentences, but we do want them to elaborate their sentences. So it is okay to have detail, and it is okay to leave some of the boxes blank. So next, we are going to explain the predicate. Who or what did they do it to? So that would be to the two dogs. So children walked two dogs. When did this happen? In the winter. And where did this happen? Around the block. And then you could ask how much, or how often, depending on the picture prompt. And I'm going to say that these kids walk the dogs every day. So now we have all of these pieces of information, and now we can take our sticky notes or your strips of paper in your pocket chart or the words on your smartboard, and we can now manipulate these words and create a sentence. So first, we're going to start with two young children. Two young children walked two dogs in the winter around the block every day. So now we know we can explain to our students that we have a subject and a predicate. You can also vary the word order, right? So I could also explain to my students that I can splice my subject and my predicate, and I can start my sentence with every day instead of ending it with every day. Every day, two young children walk two dogs in the winter around the block. You can vary the word order depending on the needs and level of your students. You'll notice that when we are expanding the subject and the predicate, we are focusing on function. So we're asking when, where, how questions, right? We're not asking for grammatical terminology. We just want our students to be able to answer the function question, and that is how they will learn to expand and build their sentences. Masterpiece Sentences is a vehicle to develop the understanding of grammatic and syntactic structures and help students apply them to writing. The focus is on the function words play in a sentence. So we're going to ask the students the function questions to help them build a sentence. Again, here is the completed chart with the grammatical terminology, and this truly is just for the teacher's knowledge. That brings us to our closing today. I hope today was a helpful review of how syntax instruction can be taught during reading, writing, and speaking. We talked a bit about comprehension and the importance of comprehension at the sentence level. We talked a great deal about function first, labeling later. And lastly, we ended with function-based questions to expand those sentences. Here are 3 QR codes for additional learning in the area of syntax. Our last session will be on vocabulary and morphology. Thank you for joining today, and I encourage you to stay connected to the MiMTSS TA Center.